Hello and welcome to Politics Today. I'm Farrukh Pitafi. Today we are going to take a step away from Pakistan's politics and we are going to talk about one humanitarian issue which is very important. Pakistan's concerns about Kashmir and how the human rights of Kashmiris are being eroded by the Indian government. They are quite visible. We have been actually tabling them for quite some time, but now the Foreign Office, the State of Pakistan actually have actually issued a dossier documenting all human rights violations in Indian illegally occupied Kashmir. And not only that, we have actually shown all the pictures, all the details, the numbers as well, which are staggering. Just remember 8,000 to 10,000 people documented have been enforced disappearances, and their wives are now called half widows. That is not all. People have been killed. Rape is being used as a weapon of war, and we have seen the way, especially the Modi government. Even though before Modi government there was a lot of violation of human rights there, but this government seems to have taken torture and brutality to a new level. So that dossier and its contents are very important. We are going to talk about that. And in order to help us understand how does the government of Pakistan, the state of Pakistan, plan to proceed, we are joined by Munir Akram Saab, who is Pakistan's permanent representative to the United Nations. Thank you very much, Ambassador Saab, for being part of the program. The first question that I have to ask you, and I'm going to do it with your permission. First, we have to actually play a report that our team has prepared. Let us watch that, and then I'm going to ask the question.
The claim of so-called Shining India had always been dubious, but then Pakistan presented a comprehensive dossier unmasking the true face of Indian atrocities in illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and the room for any doubt has been diminished. The 131-page dossier highlighting the grave human rights violations was presented by Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi, along with National Security Advisor Dr. Mueed Yusuf and Federal Human Rights Minister Dr. Shiri Mazari. It showed that 50,000 women have faced sexual violence at the hands of Indian forces, out of which 31,240 women were reportedly raped. Almost 400,000 people have been killed since the start of the occupation in 1947, while more than 25,000 people have been blinded by pellet guns. There are also more than 161,000 reported instances of torture, whereas 8,652 mass graves were also discovered in the occupied valley. Most importantly, it confirmed the long-held suspicion of Indian patronage and training of the militant Islamic State group, which is a serious concern. The evidence suggested that India was operating 5 training camps in Gulmarg, Raipur, Jodhpur, Chakrata, Anupgarh, and Bikaner. The United Nations has not yet placed sanctions on India despite contravention of its resolutions. Yet, it is baffling as to why India has not been pushed to allow access of UN observers in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. By now, the international community should realize that the policy of appeasement has never worked in history. The last time it was tried, the whole world was plunged into war and 75 million lives were lost. But after presenting this dossier, the foreign minister expressed his optimism and said, "One day, I am confident the oppressors will be held accountable."
Right. So you have watched the report. Another very important thing is 5 training centers for ISIS that Pakistan has revealed that India is actually running at this moment. We are going to talk about all these matters. And let me go to Ambassador Saab. Ambassador Saab, now we have a dossier that the government of Pakistan has issued. In the past also, you presented a couple of dossiers to the United Nations Secretary General. What happens now, sir? How do we actually take this case further?
Well, the purpose of putting out the dossier, as I understand it, is to expose the policies and crimes of the Modi government in Jammu and Kashmir and against Pakistan. And this dossier obviously is a major step forward in our campaign to expose India's criminal behavior and its crimes in Jammu and Kashmir, in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. So we will take it forward. It has been issued by the government and has been presented by the foreign minister, and we will obviously take it forward at the United Nations to all the relevant organs, the Secretary General, the Security Council, the General Assembly, the Human Rights Council, and other bodies, including the organization of the Islamic Conference, which has been very closely involved with that, and whose working group on Jammu and Kashmir will be meeting here at the United Nations in the next few days during the visit of the foreign minister. So we will be taking up this dossier in all the organs of the UN.
In the past, Ambassador Saab, it was said that Pakistan keeps on agitating these issues but doesn't present that kind of documented evidence. Since this government has come, we have actually presented as much evidence as possible. Parts of it are concerning international law. For example, the use of cluster bombs across the LOC. Similarly, enforced disappearances and the way women have been brutalized. Is there a way to actually approach this matter legally, internationally, sir?
Well, you know, legally, let me be clear. Legally, there is an international criminal court which can take up crimes of this nature, but there is a question of jurisdiction. Pakistan is not a party to the ICC, neither is India, and therefore there are jurisdictional issues. Similarly, jurisdictional issues arise in the International Court of Justice, where India has reserved its position that no issue to which it does not agree can be taken up jurisdictionally by the International Court of Justice. And Pakistan has similar reservations in the ICJ. So jurisdictional issues are what prevents us from taking this to the international courts. There are, of course, a question of taking an advisory opinion, but an advisory opinion requires a decision either by the Security Council or the General Assembly, and which requires the adoption of a resolution. And that, of course, runs into the issue of the major powers who support India and who stand in the way of the adoption of such actions. So within these constraints, we will have to find a effective way forward.
Right. Ambassador sir, I understand the jurisdiction issue, but one example of Rohingyas in Myanmar that actually ended up with ICJ, and we saw that it was actually taken forward. The second example or the method people talk about is of lawfare. Is there a chance that Pakistan can proceed in that manner? Okay. It seems that we have momentarily lost Ambassador Saab, but while we are actually talking about these matters, till the time he comes back and I'm going to resume the questions, let us talk about the salient features of the said report. Repeatedly, Indian government, especially Narendra Modi's government, has used pellet guns, which has blinded young children. I hope that we have the visuals as well. Otherwise, there are visuals that are available on the Foreign Office's website. This dossier is available there as well. Children have lost their eyes, and there hasn't been any outcry. Similarly, enforced disappearances that we were talking about. Young kids have been picked up, they have been brutalized, and they continue to be brutalized as we speak at this moment. The example of rapes, 31,200 rapes. And these numbers, of course, some of these numbers are since 1947, but there are others which have recently appeared in front of you. The way India actually unilaterally cancelled out the arrangement that it had with the Kashmiri people, and the way it has actually nullified everything, that is before the world. So the question at this moment is, and today in today's program, I am still hoping that we get the ambassador back. Ambassador Saab, he is with us again. Ambassador Saab, I was asking one example of Rohingyas, their case being taken to ICJ is very important because there too jurisdictional issues were there. Can Pakistan or any third party do something about it, about Kashmir, through that way or through lawfare?
That's a good question, and we've obviously examined it. In the Rohingyas case, the matter was brought to the ICC by Gabon, which is a member of the ICC. And it was brought in the jurisdiction that the Rohingyas were in Bangladesh, which was also a member of the ICC. So that is how the jurisdiction issue was solved in the case of the Rohingyas. We have, unfortunately, a situation where neither Pakistan nor India are members of the ICC, and therefore the jurisdictional issues arise. There are other means to address the issue, and we are looking at that possibilities. But you know, the straightforward thing is that the Human Rights Council and the General Assembly and the Third Committee of the General Assembly are organs where we can raise these issues and seek satisfaction in terms of action by the international community against India. But then it becomes a political question, and it becomes as to whether those major powers who support India will be willing to come along and censure India for its actions. And therefore, what we require is political lobbying, political actions to expose India and to ask the international community to condemn its behavior. So there are different angles with which we can approach the issue, and we will try all possibilities, obviously.
Right. Ambassador Saab, you are one of Pakistan's finest diplomats, a career diplomat. Let me ask you a candid question. I understand that India has a lot of punching power. It has a lot of influence and clout. What are the pressure points that can be actually used to force India to A, stop all these violations of human rights and respect international law, and then to convince the world that obviously is ensnared by India's influence to actually do something about it?
Well, you know, we have to convince the major powers and a large majority of countries to join us in condemning Indian actions. And once there is such condemnation, there will be pressure on India to change its policies. But we have to first convince major powers who defend India, who are India's trading partners, strategic partners. We have to convince them that they must join in censuring India's criminal, non-democratic, and atrocious behavior. To do that, obviously, we will lobby at the United Nations, we will lobby in the capitals, we will try to convince the capitals to change their policies. But, you know, major capitals have major interests in India. And therefore, often what we need to do is to go down to the level of the public opinion in those countries, to be able to influence their public opinion, to put pressure on those governments to live up to the principles of human rights that they adhere to and which they proclaim so loudly in various bodies in the case of other situations, but remain silent on the issue of Jammu and Kashmir. So our campaign not only has to be at the level of governments, at the level of the United Nations, at the level of capitals, but it also has to be at the ground level in most of these democratic, so-called democratic countries, influence their public opinion and let that public opinion exercise pressure on the governments in order to change their policies.
Right. Ambassador Saab, you were talking about the silence of world powers regarding Kashmir. And that actually takes me back to the liberal world order, which is apparently based on the values of democracy and human rights. Reconcile it for us. Why is it that these powers which actually believe in human rights and democracy choose to ignore what is happening in Kashmir?
Well, I think the answer is quite evident. One, they have a strategic partnership with India. India is now the major strategic partner of the Western world, and particularly of the United States. And that partnership is designed to contain the rise of China. It is a strategic partnership to contain China. And therefore, they do not wish to do anything that will erode the ability of India to cooperate with them to serve this strategy of containing China. And India obviously plays that card and tells them that if you criticize us on human rights, we will not play the game, the strategic game with you. And that, of course, silences many capitals. Similarly, India has a large market. The corporations in the Western world are all looking to ingress into that market, to get contracts, to get supply arrangements. They are major defense suppliers. They're major opportunities for some of the digital social media companies in India. There are suppliers of various equipment which wish to sell to the Indian market. They want to get projects, contracts in India. And of course, all of these are made conditional by the Indians that they would give these contracts to or will cooperate with only those countries which are not critical of India's policies. And therefore, these between the strategic interests and the economic interests, this is a huge factor which silences the voices of the so-called defenders of human rights.
Right. Ambassador Saab, while you were actually explaining it, and thank you very much for doing it, I felt that you were explaining realpolitik, not the liberal world order. I mean, if human rights are something which are relative, then what exactly is the whole idea of actually pushing all these countries? Right. We are trying to connect again. One question that I still have to ask is not merely about human rights, but also about the 5 training camps that India is running, recruiting people actually that are going to be used in ISIS and its activities. Ambassador Saab is back with us. Ambassador Saab, I was talking about the relativity of human rights then. The idea was that the West and democratic forces actually believe in human rights, and no matter what their interest is, they are going to actually stand up for human rights. That means that human rights and democracy ends where Kashmir starts?
Yes, but not only Kashmir, Palestine. there are certain blind spots for the Western liberal world. Kashmir is one of them, Palestine is one of them, and there are a few other areas, mostly Muslim issues, in which they do not feel compelled to stand up for the standards and principles to which they so vocally adhere. This is double standards and hypocrisy, which we speak about, which we are very vocal about, telling them that you have double standards.
Right.
But
Right, Ambassador, sir, one big revelation in this dossier is 5 terror camps, the ISIS terror camps that India is running, and Pakistan has even given the GPS location and all the details about it. Do you think that given what has happened recently in Afghanistan and elsewhere as well, this is an important issue and Pakistan can actually raise awareness about this matter?
Yes, of course. We have presented a previous dossier about India's sponsorship of terrorism from Afghanistan against Pakistan. And this is, of course, a supplementary information with regard to training camps within India itself against Pakistan. I think for us, it is no secret that India has been sponsoring terrorism against Pakistan for many years. And they have intensified this campaign during the last few years in what is called a sort of hybrid war against Pakistan to destabilize us. So I think this is good information. We will share it with the international community. We will ask the international community to go and look at these locations, and I hope the international community will respond. But again, the same considerations which I mentioned with regard to human rights, similar considerations can be expected from the defenders of human rights.
Right. That actually brings us to the end of this segment. Ambassador Munir Akram Saab, thank you very much, sir, for your precious time. Thank you very much for your precious input. Thank you. Let me now actually come back to the studio. I'm joined by a very, well-informed panel. With me is Brigadier Retired Rashid Wali Janjua Sahab, who is acting president of IPRI, Islamabad Policy Research Institute. Thank you very much, sir, for being part of the program. And next to him is Dr. Waqas Ali Kausar, who is an expert on foreign affairs with a special aspect, which is special context, which is important, that he actually hails from Kashmir as well. Thank you very much, sir, for being part of the program. We are going to take this discussion forward, but before that, we have to take a small break. Viewers, let us take a break. When we come back, we are going to take the discussion forward. Welcome back. Before going to the break, we were talking about the dossier that government of Pakistan has released, and that actually contains the various instances of India's violations of human rights in Kashmir, and the way India actually does it reminds you of various genocides. This is, ladies and gentlemen, a genocide that is going on in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And it actually reminded us of Rwanda and umpteen other also. The Rwandan genocide spanned over just 100 days. April 1994 to July 1994, while the Bosnian War lasted for 3 years, 1992 to 1995. The conflict in IOJK, on the other hand, is still continuing even 100 years later. Since 1947, over 400,000 people have been killed by the Indian occupational forces. That's 4 times more than those killed in Bosnia and about half of those killed in Rwanda. This is in spite of 11 UN resolutions having passed on IOJK over the span of 75 years compared to 7 UN resolutions related to the Bosnian and 5 UN resolutions on the Rwandan genocide. So there's a lot to worry about and a lot to reflect here. Let me come to the studio. Brigadier Saab, you must have gone through the entirety of the dossier. It is a great step that the government of Pakistan has not only documented this, but released it in a very timely fashion. What next? What do we do now?
It's a very good step, and in fact, a combination of diplomacy and lawfare was required, and government has taken the timely step. You see, this is evidence which has been very painstakingly gathered, and when you go to the international fora and you want to use lawfare as an offensive option,
Right.
you got to follow the right channels and the right fora.
Okay. Can you
There are-
identify them?
Yes, there are several forums like General Assembly,
Yeah.
Human Rights Council. Then you can invoke ICERD, Convention of Elimination of Racial Discrimination.
Right. And where do we go actually to get relief?
You go to the
ICJ or ICC?
No, not ICJ and ICC. There are separate forums.
Okay.
You can go, like I said, that you can take it to the office of, High Commissioner for Human Rights.
Right.
You can take it to Human Rights Council. You can take it to General Assembly, and you have to package this into right categories.
Okay.
You see, whether you are trying to package these as human right violations, war crimes, or the crimes against humanity. There are very major differences between the 3 categories, and interestingly, in the Indian depredations in IOJK, they span the entire gamut of human right abuses, war against, crime against humanity, and war crimes.
Right.
Unconsented and effective occupation of a state to which a force does not have
Right.
the sovereign title. It is treated as occupation, and the army which occupies is an occupation army.
Right.
So we have to establish legally that IOJK is
Okay.
under occupation,
Right.
and if it is under occupation, it then it merits the violation of the human right abuses. It becomes war crimes.
Right.
Because
it does. And the concern at this moment is that it is world's highest military deployment. There hasn't been a bigger deployment. That is not all. India is now even using cluster bombs across LOC. So what else do we need to make these cases? They are there.
You see, they are there, but you have to properly identify. You have to properly institute a
We
legal.
must be doing it already.
We are not doing it because how it needs to be done is that there, a proper investigation has to be instituted through a legal statute. For instance, our area study centers, our universities, their vice chancellors have the mandate legally.
Yeah.
So it has to be this investigation has to be instituted as a legal entity, and you have to identify the perpetrators, and you have to identify the evidence, and the evidence to be given by those witnesses, those who can depose in a court of law.
Right.
So it has to be done very
and
meticulously.
we are going to further talk about it. Let me bring in the resident Kashmiri professor here. He's an expert in his own right. Dr. Saab, we are talking about these aspects, right? When India actually abrogated 370, when it actually did away with 35A, at that time, if you remember, our impression was that whatever India is doing will actually stand out and the world will react. Media did. But the pace with which India keeps on increasing these atrocities, and every day they invent a new torture, that seems to be staggering. And yet the silence is stupefying simultaneously. What is happening here?
True. I mean, it was very much obvious. I mean, the report which says about the different types of the torture and the human rights violations. But let me begin with
children are being
yes.
blinded.
But let me tell you one important thing, that it's just the tip of iceberg. If you see the entire reports that have been published internationally, I mean, if you see Human Rights Watch, if you see Doctors Without Border, I mean, they have published report in 2010 and 16 as well about the mental and psychological impact of this, brutal occupation on young people particularly. It was alarming the way, I mean, more than 50-60% young people are in a psychological distress and that trauma actually, particularly in that condition. See, one of the important things that we missed during the entire phase, what I feel is that we could have invested more energies to understand and deconstruct the actual impact and the method and the instrument that have been used to occupy and suppress Kashmiris. Human rights violation, of course, but in different manifestation when we say, I mean, there was a report on structures of violence, like reports and all these things that have been published. I mean, if you see the overall framework, I mean, that was something that we need to educate our people here and understand that was very much structured. It's not only occupying land, but it's how they have, totally sort of occupied this psychological, social, economic and other aspects of the people by using brutal force. The problem is, I guess it's the problem of documentation. A society which is under, worse crisis of occupation, you have very limited avenues. You have to survive as well. You have to, I mean, for your life at least, you have to survive. You cannot document those things. Even we have to salute the human rights workers and people and activists over there.
We do that. But my concern is, first, it wasn't my channel, it wasn't Pakistani publication, it was BBC that kept on documenting since 2014 the blinded children because of the pellet guns, and that continued, and it was a really harrowing scene, right? Then comes a picture where a child, a toddler, is sitting on the dead body of his uncle, and it has been actually shown to the world. Similarly, umpteen other things are happening. First, they changed the status of Kashmir, and now they are trying to demographically change it as well. With that kind of, malice, when they are doing it, how much are you going to document? Someday you have to ask people to do something about it.
No, absolutely. I don't mean that we need not to say. We need to, of course, push international world as well. But my idea is that even, when there's a certain framing of the news, particularly when it goes to the Western media. I must say that when you say that the children have been blinded, pelleted, I guess this entire story could have been told in a more fair and objective way. Pakistan has tried that, but I guess there's a lot of work that needed to be done to introduce to the Western world, particularly the people who believe in human rights values and the values of democracy and peace and justice, particularly that I think so in the Western academic circles and policy think tanks as well. Of course, there is a knowledge, but not a very detailed knowledge, because one of the factors that India is, of course, due to its diaspora and of course its economic and other might, they try to cover it up and try to make these stories.
Indian diaspora doesn't believe that Kashmiris are human beings?
I mean, at least they don't believe in their fundamental rights.
Blinded will have the same kind of hopeless future, any child anywhere blinded.
That's a fundamental question to their society and their people. Those who live in the Western society believe in their democratic values and rights, that this equally applies to the people of Jammu and Kashmir as well. So my idea is that we need to consistently not only document but also have advocate and develop an art of storytelling, that what is actually happening over there. And just one last thing. I mean, see,
You know, I totally get it, what you are saying. My concern is while this is going on and India has proven itself to be a nuisance, what is happening then? Narendra Modi is going to attend the Quad meeting. You know, that kind of disconnect from the values you actually yourself profess. You are a democracy. Democracy believes by definition in human rights.
so
And nobody is taking care of
So
that.
I have a question. I have a question on a larger scale. Once you have people and leadership like this, there's a very obvious impact, a short term and long term as well.
Yeah.
So do you think that India over the period of time got stabilized? Are there is a more political freedom over there? You think the society is more harmonized after suppressing Kashmiris? It didn't happen.
No,
I guess
but
even if you see the region, if you see
I totally get what you're saying, and I understand that there are going to be long-term consequences. I get it. But my problem is that I'm father of kids and I am putting myself in the place of that child that was sitting on the dead body of his grandfather or someone who has been blinded. Time is not going to reverse itself for them.
True.
Brigadier Saab, you can add to what was being said, but there is another humongous revelation here. ISIS or Daesh is continuously spoken about internationally, and now the government of Pakistan has given its addresses that India is running 5 training camps for Daesh within India. So what are we going to do about that?
You see this misanthropic creed Hindutva, which is completely devouring India itself, is exporting instability, and the entire world knows why they are ignoring is because of the political reasons. India is a big market. India is a strategic ally.
Right.
So, they'll always ignore.
Sorry to cut you, but what you are saying is capitalism beats democracy.
No, I don't say that. What I'm saying
Human
is
rights are
that
democracy.
that realpolitik, business, it trumps human rights considerations.
So India, if
But there are ways and means.
Sir,
And so let
I'm
me.
sorry to once again. I just wanted to hone that answer. I just want to understand that if India is violating human rights and principles of democracy, it is a big, fat milching cow, and that's why they're going to actually work with it. China is even bigger. Then why would you actually care what happens in China?
That is why we need to proceed very, very, intelligently. We have to strike where you asked the question about the pressure points from Ambassador
And you also.
Munir.
Yeah.
So we have those. We know those pressure points. There's a international conscience embedded in academia, in human rights, civil society organizations. We know there's a mechanism, instrument called BDS, which was used very effectively by Palestinians: boycott, divestments, and sanctions. And believe you me,
But now
the
Israel
academia,
actually calls it some enemies
they might,
of civilization.
but it's resonating well with the civil society and academia of the world. People like Stephen Hawking and Richard Dawkins, they were converts to this idea, and when they started criticizing and distancing, the impact was felt. And when the cosmetics giant Oava of Israel was put into sanctions, so it created this impact, because this is pandering or this is appealing to the conscience of civil society organizations, academia, and the banking systems.
Right.
And BDS is an effective tool.
Ambassador,
Then there are
Brigadier Sahab, this was an argument that we actually discussed in 2014 when Narendra Modi actually unleashed all these horrors in Kashmir, right? Children were being blinded. And Pakistan kept on pushing for it, international fora, meeting people, civil society. But then India evicts actually amnesty people as well, declaring them persona non grata.
Very, very good question. The answer to this is we must invest more. We must invest more by way of intellectual capital, by way of material resources. We must buttress our lawfare structure. We must create a very strong organization of international law expertise in foreign affairs division, in law ministry, in IOJK ministry,
Right.
and use those channels. You see, it's not only human right abuses. We need to conflate those with crimes against humanity, because when it gets elevated to crime against humanity,
Right.
which means that human right abuses are as per a systematic and concerted manner,
Right.
and they are being done in a manner that is systematic. So crime against humanity has no legal remedy under domestic
Right.
courts also.
Right.
So that's another point. Then
Yeah,
the
but-
universal jurisdiction, there are domestic laws of
But the
countries.
consensus that I got from listening to all of you is that because India is so powerful, international system means nothing at this moment. And that actually brings me back to Dr. Kausar. Dr. Saab, as a Kashmiri, and of course we all are human beings, what Kashmiris are going through, I wouldn't wish upon my worst enemies, right? But this actually brings us back to the question of morality in the international system. Is it relevant at all? Or human beings, and I'm talking about thousands, hundreds of thousands of people being blinded, maimed, picked up, disappeared. There's not going to be any kind of karma for them.
I mean, this is a big, thank you for raising this question, particularly of morality aspect, because in the international global order, there have been a lot of talks about this moral and liberal values, particularly when it comes to Kashmir. I mean, there's a big question mark, because given the nature of conflict one, and then given the nature of violations that happened over there, I mean, there's a big question on the international system and global order.
Sure.
Particularly, there is one point when we all keep on saying that maybe India is so powerful that no one is listening or maybe paying any heed. I still have a hope. I still have a hope on two things. One, particularly, this is a very just political movement of people that their lives have been laid. People say 400. Someone was saying that 100,000 people have laid their lives. I guess if you start from 47, around 0.5 million people only were massacred in Jammu, particularly where Muslim majority was converted into. Now it is now is the other way around.
Yeah.
Now I personally think that Kashmiris, one of the thing that we need to see that over the period of 73 years, despite having so many critical times, downfalls, curfews, 5th of August and all these things, Kashmiris still are resisting. Kashmiris still are there.
Right.
To
but now Indian government actually plans to bring about this demographic shift by converting Kashmiris, as you have pointed out. In Jammu they did it. Now they plan to do it in the entirety of Kashmir.
See,
by bringing outliers, settling them there and killing these people off.
I guess this is the fundamental responsibility we need to engage world on this, particularly on demographic changes. One, because this is a crime. I mean, this is a disputed
It has
territory.
been 72 years.
One
How
legally,
further do we have to work?
Legally, it's post 5th of August. Before that, there was state subject rule. It was sort of protected. But after that,
I didn't mention Jammu's massacre, you did.
Yes.
And it was before that.
That was actually when the mass migration happened, it happened. But my fundamental point is, of course, this is one of the areas which we need to document, not only document but sensitize people about the change. But on the other side, I must say, if you see what India has gained after 5th of August, I don't see anything. I mean, territory belongs to people. It's fundamental about people.
But Modi is using Kashmir to actually bolster his Hindutva and hardline credentials within India. And the longer and the stronger he is,
they have been using
more atrocities are going to be there.
Yes, they have been using Kashmir in past for their political gains, short political gains. Okay. It didn't happen. I have just one more question. I guess if it's the way of approaching as well. If the world is unanimously agreed on, let's suppose there's a new mantra of sustainable development goals where people and world wants that they should have they have the shared and agreed goals. I mean, their goal number 14 is all about peace, justice, and security.
Out of the window.
So if you see
all money.
But that's what I'm saying. They've agreed. All of us agreed on that.
Yeah.
So it has to be seen that in the regional context as well, that not only in justice in Kashmir or peace in Kashmir, or justice, what we mean is that their self-determination, but it is also, you know, jeopardizing the peace of the entire region.
Right.
So you cannot have a global agenda fulfilled even in this region if you cannot solve these conflicts.
And you're absolutely right. I've been warned twice or thrice that we have overstretched actually overshot the allotted time. I have to conclude the program here. Brigadier Sahab, thank you very much, sir, for your precious time. Dr. Sahab, thank you very much as well. Viewers, one aspect which is very interesting, but since the US actually withdrew from Afghanistan within past 1 month, Western media has gone haywire talking about what a bad mistake it was and how all Afghans are prone to human rights violation, which they are, and I'm not complaining about it. On the other side, Kashmir, this theater has been going on for 73 years, and now it has become totally intolerable. And yet, not a peep on these matters. If you want to care about Afghanistan, if you want to care about other people elsewhere in the region, then for heaven's sake, start paying attention to the Kashmiris as well, because whether you like it or not, they are also human beings. This was today's program. Thank you very much for watching. Take care.